So welcome everyone to today's discussion, pairing hydropower with battery storage. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen McNally Murphy. I'm the National Director of the Hydropower Reform Coalition. And we're joined today by Jack West with the Alabama Rivers Alliance and Andy Fisk from Connecticut River Conservancy. Before we jump into the presentation, I want to just go over a few sort of ground rules. First off, this is being recorded and it'll be available on our website in the next couple of days, as well as I'll send the recording out to everyone who's registered. Please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation and when you're not speaking, and we'll have time for discussion at the end. If you have any comments or questions during the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to those during the discussion. There are closed captions if anyone would like to use those. And does anyone have any quick questions before we jump in? All right, well, with that, then I will turn it over to Andy and Jack.
Afternoon or good morning, folks. Thank you for coming out. I'm Andy Fisk. I'm part of the team at the Connecticut River Conservancy, and I work along with two of our river stewards, Andrea Donlin and Kathy Erfer, on our hydro work, as well as some great lawyers and academic support and consulting team. So, and Jack.
Hey everybody, my name is Jack West. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director at Alabama Rivers Alliance and have the pleasure of being part of the Hydropower Reform Coalition and spearhead a lot of our hydro work in Alabama. So to set the stage here, why are we thinking about this topic of pairing energy storage with hydropower? First, big disclaimer, neither Andy nor I are engineers or energy storage experts. We both came to this topic from the perspective of river conservation and lessening hydro's environmental impacts on our rivers. And this is a promising technology to do so. So we've been following the developments and engaging in our respective relicensings from that perspective. I do want to say that there are, actually, next slide, please, Andy.
It's just a quick overview on our relicensing. So I think that it's important to know these two different relicensing. So we're involved in an integrated licensing process of 5 facilities here that are owned by 2 different investment firms. And the facilities are listed here, but they span about 200 miles of the Connecticut River in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. One of them is a very large pump storage facility, 1,100 megawatts. Total rated storage here is about north of 1,300 megawatts in this project. And then, Jack, your project?
Yeah, we're engaged with a relicensing on Alabama's Tallapoosa River of Harris Dam, which is a hydro peaking project rated at about 135 megawatts.
One of the important parts here is we came in to this issue at different points in the relicensing process, which is going to have an impact on what we've been able to do. And
I want to point out that pairing or hybridizing existing hydro with energy storage has some potential benefits for the grid and for hydro owners and operators. If you have another resource there that can store energy, you can really increase the flexibility of the asset and open up a wider range of operational patterns. Hydro owner operators can also potentially use this kind of hybridization to tap into additional revenue streams and play in capacity markets and ancillary services, and also arbitrage prices to store the energy storage, whether it's battery or another form, charge it while electricity prices are low and then discharge when prices are higher. And there's also a potential benefit of kind of co-optimizing the storage with the hydro to improve management of the asset and minimize the strain on the turbines and the other project facilities. But from our perspective, the really exciting part of this is the potential environmental benefits that get unlocked when you have this much wider range of operational storage. And I think those will be shown on the next slide. So this increased operational flexibility opens up a whole host of ways to improve environmental outcomes. And you'll see on this slide that the Pacific Northwest National Lab put out a paper directly on this topic last year. And if you're interested in this overall presentation, I really highly recommend you spend some time with that white paper. And Andy and I will talk about some of these benefits specific to our projects and relicensings, but PNNL really did a great job of categorizing and explaining many of these benefits, which include, releasing flows that are more similar to the natural hydrograph and supporting required minimum flows or variable minimum flows, reducing the overall amount and intensity of peaking flows and water level fluctuations, and improving water temperature regimes and levels of dissolved gases. So there's a whole variety of ways to benefit from this kind of hybridization approach. And that's why we're talking about it. So with the stage kind of set, I'll turn it back to Andy to talk about their work.
So again, we're an environmental NGO. The Connecticut River Watershed has a lot of hydropower. So our organization has spent decades involved in relicensing. And so the relicensing that we're talking about here, the integrated licensing of these 5 facilities began formally in 2013. And the 4 of the projects are hydropower dams. And then the 5th is the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Project, which is rated at 1,100 megawatts. It's a very important asset for the New England grid. And so we were in the thick of this relicensing, and around 2016, the state of Massachusetts, like other states around the country, began exploring advanced storage in order to increase resiliency of the grid from the rollout, as we all know, of many more renewables. And so the state of Massachusetts released a report called the State of Charge. And the initial run on this policy was that the state wanted to deploy 600 megawatts of advanced storage by 2025. And so that does include chemical battery storage, which is what people tend to typically understand about advanced storage. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other options that are out there besides chemical battery storage. Since the release of that report, they've actually upped the ante, and now the state of Massachusetts is looking to deploy 1,000 megawatts by 2025. And this policy paper envisioned a fair amount of support, subsidies, tech support to be able to roll out this sector, and had a fair amount of language about how advanced storage would be deployed around the grid and would not necessarily be centralized storage, but would be strategically applied in order to where the biggest stress points were in the grid with the deployment of renewables. One of the important parts of this policy is they did note that the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage was effectively a very important part of existing storage, but it didn't count, right? And they said there will not be any additional pump storage likely in Massachusetts. We hardly agree with that. The Northfield Mountain is an open loop system that has significant impacts on the Connecticut River. So at that point, in the relicensing as advocates, we were understanding more and more we had to understand broader energy policy trends. We had to understand markets and go a lot of places that we didn't typically go with a smaller, more quote, typical hydropower relicensing. And so evaluating the field at that time, we came to recognize that battery storage was being talked about in a lot of different ways. And it occurred to us that why wouldn't you be able to deploy battery storage on hydro? And so I think this part of the story is really about how a small NGO, how do you exercise influence? How do you be able to get a conversation started? Because obviously nothing in the State of Charge report or anything in state policy talked about hydropower and advanced storage. So at the time, we began talking to people in the field and understood that the common knowledge at that point was that there was really only one example of battery storage being deployed at hydro, and that was a run-of-river facility in Cordova, Alaska. that because it was run of river at low flow conditions, they weren't able to generate. And previously they had deployed a generator running on fossil fuels, and were experimenting with chemical battery storage to replace the diesel. And so we were in the middle of this relicensing, and studies were still going on. And obviously this is not something that you can compel. So how do you develop influence around this? We approached the State Department of Energy Resources that issued that state of charge report and said, well, why wouldn't you consider being able to deploy batteries to reduce the environmental harm caused by peaking facilities? These are currently under relicensing. State of Massachusetts obviously will be issuing a 401 certificate. What do you think? Our first question was, or our first query was, when we brought this up, are they going to laugh? Well, Department of Energy Resources, nobody laughed, but we really couldn't get any reaction. So it was literally about 18 months engaging the State Energy Resource Agency to say, is there any there? Our next stop was with the Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a consortium. It's a research consortium that provides policy expertise and research to the states. They were aware of this Cordova, Alaska example and noted that there is funding from the national labs. And so again, this is before that report you saw at the beginning of the presentation that might evaluate this. Unfortunately, Clean Energy States Alliance wouldn't take any steps on this until we got the state of Massachusetts to say this was an okay idea. That unfortunately took about another year or so. So this was several years worth of work to be able to find the resources or the institution that would be able to look at this question and evaluate it from the technical perspective or the economic perspective or the policy perspective. So it took about several years for us to, one, get the endorsement from the Department of Energy Resources to say this wasn't a stupid idea. It is worth taking a look at. And at the time, there wasn't interest from the national labs from where we were approaching it. We did find out later that they were evaluating this issue themselves. So it was connecting some of the dots. What we did do at the time was to be able to assemble some funding from a private foundation to contract with a firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Synapse Energy Economics firm. And so with a small amount of money, we asked them to take one of these 5 facilities, one of the dams, and to be able to evaluate its operation and how deployment of an advanced battery storage array would influence its change from a peaking to a run of river. And then around the same time, the Department of Engineering at Dartmouth, we'd had a couple conversations with Dartmouth. An engineering faculty member picked up this question as well. And it was a class under the supervision of Professor Laser that took a look at a couple of the facilities in Vermont and New Hampshire. And so at the time, this was a couple years ago, which is eons ago in terms of technological advancement. Short story, one of the facilities they evaluated was essentially a cycling facility, not true peaking. And what they found is if you transitioned from cycling to water in, water out, you could lose between 5 and 10% of your revenue. And then they applied a couple of scenarios. What would a 10 or a 20 megawatt battery array with different storage capacity, if you deployed that and you competed in a couple of the different energy markets, what would happen? And so the Synapse study actually said when you're looking at the range of cost estimates, low to high, and how the markets would perform, you would actually be able to recoup and more than recoup your loss by the deployment of a battery array on the assumption of the low cost range, which actually now is quite credible. And so Dartmouth came up with essentially similar conclusions, not quite as sophisticated on the revenue side, but essentially the same point. And so you'll see here essentially the summary. You can recoup both energy and revenue loss as you transition away from peaking to water in, water out. And so these studies then in the middle of this relicensing were advanced to the 2 owners of the facilities, Great River Hydro and First Light Power. And We didn't hear anything back.
So I had heard about Andy's great work and what Connecticut River Conservancy was doing through our affiliation with HRC, and got curious about how energy storage might work at the Harris Dam in Alabama that is currently engaged in a relicensing. We were still in the study phase at the time, so we were able to put in a study request with FERC in the summer of 2020, asking that the licensee, Alabama Power, conduct a study to see if it would be feasible to integrate storage at Harris. We did not think that it would be feasible to convert from peaking to run of river, but that by adding some energy storage there, they might be able to reduce peaking and the associated impacts. So when we put in the study request, that was before the PNNL white paper came out. And in that study request, I relied pretty heavily on a 2019 paper from the Journal of Cleaner Production called "A New Solution to Mitigate Hydro Peaking?" Batteries versus re-regulation reservoirs. And I still think that paper is worth looking at and provides a more international perspective. And it discusses how employing battery storage can allow a hydro operator to impose environmental constraints like maximum ramping rates to essentially smooth out release patterns. The licensee, Alabama Power, was not very receptive to the study request, unfortunately, mostly on the grounds of the cost of energy storage and the cost to modify the existing turbines to accommodate a wider range of flows. But
Jack, I'm going to jump in to give you your 15-minute warning.
Thank you, Colleen. But FERC resolved the study request in our favor and recommended it be performed. So we were very excited about that. To my knowledge, and maybe somebody on the call can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the only FERC-approved study on the topic of assessing pairing storage with existing hydro that's been conducted as part of a relicensing. I hope to see more, though. So FERC latched on to the idea and even helped shape the study, the contours of it, and suggested that Alabama Power look at least two storage scenarios. The first one being pairing a 60 megawatt battery that essentially would replace the power output of one of the two turbines at Harris, and that could theoretically reduce peak releases by 50%. And then also study a second option that would look at pairing a smaller battery, 5, 10, or 20 megawatts. They eventually studied 20 megawatts that would have a proportionately smaller reduction in peak releases, about one third of a reduction when one turbine is generating. Next slide, please, Andy. I hate to read from a slide, but this is an excerpt from FERC's study determination, and it just shows how the agency really did catch on to the idea. Installing a battery energy storage system at the Harris project has the potential to mitigate project effects on water levels in the lake and fluctuations in flows released downstream during peaking operations. Potential hydrologic changes could be achieved by spreading out the releases through the day and night rather than releasing most of the flows during peak hours, and assuming the same daily volume of flow is released, installing one 60 megawatt battery to provide an equivalent amount of power provided by one turbine generator unit could reduce daily fluctuations in Harris Lake by half. So we were very excited to see FERC grant the study request. And when the Pacific Northwest National Lab put out their paper in May of 2021, I believe, they provided an excellent conceptual example that shows how storage can be paired to reduce the impacts of peaking. And I would highly recommend you take a look at that. And that'll be in the follow-up materials for sure. Let's see. So next slide, please. So Alabama Power produced a battery storage system report, and as Andy and CRC did, we engaged Synapse Energy Economics to help us go through the draft report and comment on it. Unfortunately, the roughly 20-page report presented what was, in our view, lopsided analysis that was really long on costs and short on benefits either to the grid or to aquatic resources. In fact, there was so little environmental benefits analysis that we had to file a study dispute and ask for more work. There was really only a paragraph of the report that looked at potential benefits. And FERC agreed with us and again said the licensee needed to provide some quantitative analysis of potential environmental benefits here. But Alabama Power put up a wall and said it basically wasn't going to do any more work and argued that the quantitative analysis was outside of the original scope of the study. So we haven't really been successful thus far in enticing Alabama Power to see the opportunities here. I'd hope that the utility would see it as a chance to upgrade its facilities and get a cool new grid asset with storage that it could use in a variety of ways, and just appease more stakeholders when you have a ton of competing interest in relicensing, having a much wider variety of operational patterns could please a lot of stakeholders. And they're a vertically integrated IOU utility, so it's likely that they could rate base the addition, but it hasn't quite worked out that way in practice. And even though we haven't succeeded here in getting our local licensee to be interested, there are other hydro operators taking notice of this hybridization approach and looking to actively pair storage. And I will pass it back to Andy to describe some of those efforts.
Yeah, and so I think since we've been involved in the conversation, we'll call it 5 years, 4.5 years, the world changes based on the rapidly increases in technology and other changes. So we were pleased with the National Hydropower Association. Their annual conference last year actually had a session, some of you may have actually attended, on advanced storage, and they did have the Synapse Energy economics consultants, and the report they prepared for us on the Vernon Dam in Vermont was actually part of their presentation. So we were pleased, obviously, that the industry is thinking about battery storage and the assumption that it was being considered for environmental mitigation. And so we do see that there is deployment of advanced battery storage, mostly all chemical batteries, at hydropower facilities around the country. Many of you may have heard of these. And so we were also pleased recently here in Massachusetts, First Light Power, which owns the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Project and the Turners Falls Dam, announced recently, again in year 8 of a integrated licensing proceeding, that they would be deploying a package of solar and advanced battery storage at their facility in partnership with Borrego, which is a merchant company that deploys this type of renewables. And so First Light Power did note that they would be deploying floating solar at their reservoir at the top of Northfield Mountain, ground mounted solar, and then also battery storage. And so we were encouraged at this public announcement, but in conversations with the company and asking them how they were going to be evaluating the battery storage relative to the ongoing conversations in the settlement discussions about how their current peaking operations would be changing. We didn't get a whole lot of answer, and frankly, they're not discussing how the advanced battery storage deployment at their facility will relate in any way, shape, or form to the environmental mitigation that we're all trying to work on. So I think that's what we continue to see, is that there is more and more of this deployment by the companies that own the hydropower facilities, but they are not being deployed for mitigation of hydro peaking. And some of that has to do with the fact that technology is changing, but also you're seeing incentives and subsidies, whether that's through the infrastructure bill or RPS changes. So Massachusetts does have a clean peak standard. And so the state is doing a really good job being able to incentivize the deployment of advanced battery storage. So again, it comes back to this point for where we are. We're at a different place than Alabama Rivers. We were in the middle of relicensing. We didn't have a FERC endorsed study. And so really our work around Advanced battery storage is sort of off page. Can we encourage? Is there a way to make this happen? But we really don't have any handles, and do not expect, like in Alabama, where it may show up in the NEPA process in some way. We don't have a hook at this point in order to move the conversation farther along. But it's clear the technology is workable, and there is market and policy signals to get it on the ground.
So what might be next? The national labs are very much on the case here. As Andy mentioned, we were both kind of getting interested in this, and then found out about how much activity there's been among DOE and the national labs. There are 3 of them currently working on a 3-year project to accelerate industry adoption of hybridizing hydro with storage. And it seems like hydropower hybrids are really on the cusp of breakthrough, and that there could be a whole lot of this deployment in the next 10 years. And this group of national labs here are standing up a technical advisory group to guide some of the work, and have invited some of our NGOs to participate. So there will be some river advocate voices in the mix here. And our refrain is, again, that advanced energy storage is just rapidly evolving and declining in costs exponentially. And there are also new technologies within batteries that don't necessarily rely on lithium or on many of the rare earth metals that come with all of the mining and supply chain problems that we are pretty familiar with. One of those is an iron air battery technology storage that's billed to be a 10x reduction in cost and provide 10 times longer duration storage. It's one that I'm personally kind of excited about and following. A company called Form Energy is one of the leaders in that space. And I think they've completed a demonstration project and have announced an upcoming project with Georgia Power, not necessarily on their hydropower, not to pair with hydro, but just on Georgia Power's grid. So they're moving into a larger deployments. And I also just want to point out that even though batteries are kind of a prevalent technology, other energy storage technology should be considered here. It could be that gravity-based storage or flywheels or compressed air or who knows what may end up winning the day. But right now, electrochemical battery storage is proving to be one of the most popular forms. But our main question that Andy mentioned that we don't have a great answer to, and this is kind of leading into discussion and food for thought for the coalition and other interested parties, is how do we make sure that this hybridization approach actually ends up resulting in improved environmental performance? The projects that we're seeing attempt to add storage don't appear to be doing so for environmental reasons yet, and are really taking advantage of market conditions and deriving financial benefits. So there's one point in that 2019 paper that I mentioned that kind of gives me a little bit of hope here, and that's that meeting operational constraints and to improve environmental outcomes could really be understood as a new grid service, like an environmental service, and be rewarded by markets. So providing that environmental service could become yet another stream of income for the storage assets that get paired with existing hydro. But how exactly we reshape markets to recognize and compensate for a new environmental service is kind of above my pay grade. But I hope that some forward-thinking hydro operators and some national lab folks can make some progress there. And that's all I've got. Andy, any concluding remarks before we kind of move into discussion and Q&A?
No, just happy to have questions and conversation on this one, because this really is we're at a place where we have opportunities to figure out how we can exercise influence.
Well, wonderful. Thank you both so much for that presentation. Does anyone want to jump in with a question? Yeah, Teresa.
First of all, just want to thank you for the presentation, because we are looking into this on a project here in California. Yeah, the real question is, how do we get the industry to wrap their minds around this and start? It's just, I mean, we're all sitting here shaking our head. So I just wanted to find out, I mean, how much influence is there working with the national labs? What, I mean, is that kind of the opportunity? Is that where you would direct folks that are trying to find this hook? Granted, understanding that you haven't exactly gotten, but you've gotten further than anybody else.
I think that's one excellent place to start, Teresa. I mean, really that paper from last year that Pacific Northwest National Lab put together gives us a guiding document to take to industry, to use before FERC and the agencies, to say this is real and these benefits can be created, and here's some examples of how it can work. And I know that they're continuing to develop tools to help hydro owner operators figure out how to size the appropriate battery to potentially pair with an existing hydro facility. So I think the more collaboration with the national labs, the better. Again, they've reached out to some of us to be on a technical advisory group to continue to be part of that conversation. And of course, they have more sway with industry than we do usually.
Yeah, I think that a couple different places, but yeah, there's no magic bullet, Teresa. I think if you can get in like Jack did at the point in the process where you can get a FERC required study, and then you have opportunities to have at least NEPA to talk about this, get it into the alternatives analysis. I think another place that we're thinking about, and one of our challenges is there is now a tremendous amount of money, whether it's in the infrastructure bill for subsidizing environmental improvements at hydropower projects, or whether it's RPS incentives or low impact hydro incentives. Let's get the policy there. And so I can imagine a conversation here in Massachusetts. If Massachusetts is handing out an RPS benefit and they look at First Light Power and they say, you're not going to get a Clean Peak Standard benefit unless you attach it to environmental mitigation. You don't just plop it on your land and garner, you've missed a nexus to give the public an additional benefit. And if we're paying you for this, it is very reasonable to connect it to make sure that battery is connected to the hydro project, not just sitting on the lawn next to the powerhouse. And that's, you can do that through policy. And then otherwise, I don't know, keep us posted.
One additional note on Andy's point there is that, and the PNNL paper describes some of this, but you can co-locate the battery storage with the existing hydro and put it on the same geographic footprint right next to the hydro facility, but that's not necessarily required. A utility may want to put that storage somewhere else on its grid to provide more benefits, but they could still co-optimize it to work with the hydro facility to provide the same environmental performance. But it doesn't necessarily need to sit adjacent to an existing hydro facility.
Yeah, and sometimes that's much better for the grid, because what we're hearing is we want storage, but we want it at very precise places. And so it's another element. If you're handing out a public subsidy, key the amount or the existence of the subsidy to the amount of environmental mitigation plus support for renewables.
So I also want to, two things. First, if you're comfortable, I would invite you to turn your camera on, participating in the discussion here. No pressure. But also we do have some folks from the national labs. So if you feel like jumping in and speaking from the lab perspective, feel free. Let's go to Kevin, and then there's a question in the chat we'll do next.
Yeah, so as to the question on how to make this happen, I think it's a process. I think it's a process of education. We don't have an RPS here in Idaho at all. but both of our major utilities are now starting to build battery storage projects. So at least the utilities are now grasping the concept of battery storage. And now it's a matter of educating them to understand that maybe you could use this to improve some of your hydro operations. But I think it really is a matter of education. You can push with the PUC. Sometimes that's not a whole really productive. The other thing you can do is if your local utility is investor owned and they have investor or stock shareholder meetings, you can arrange a little bit of a theater at shareholder meetings and get some push going that way as well. So yeah, I think it's more of a long-term educational process.
Agreed.
Sorry, I'm muted. There's a question from Jeffrey in the chat. Are there any clear examples you're aware of where energy storage attached to hydro has had demonstrable environmental benefits, in country or not? Any success stories you can think of?
I am not personally aware of any demonstrable environmental benefits that have come out of one of these hybridization opportunities. I think they have primarily been market and financial benefits accruing to hydro owner operators. But that's the question that we have to tackle. How do we get to that point? There was a project, a demonstration project in Kevin's neck of the woods with Idaho Falls Power, I believe, that demonstrated how pairing storage could create what's called black start capabilities for the grid. You can essentially restart parts of the grid during an outage, and that provides an ancillary service to the grid that can be compensated, which is useful. It's not an environmental benefit, but it's certainly a grid benefit that's not necessarily tied to just financial reward. Andy, do you know of any examples?
Not aware, but I don't claim to have exhaustive knowledge of all the deployments. I don't think any of them, or that we're aware of, that have tried. But theoretically, there's really no technical limitation to this. That's what the consultants were saying. That was one of our threshold questions. Can you even do it? Yeah, doesn't seem technically problematic.
Oh, great. We'll go to Eve and then William.
Thanks. So I just started reading the NREL report on hydropower in the Northeast, and it's very striking how much they feel like we are headed towards needing way more flexible power as natural gas goes away and wind and solar come online, and particular times of day that we all know who work in hydropower of when those happen. So I'm really curious if, I'd love to hear from the NREL people, like, can these things, I don't know, the way I'm interpreting this most recent report is maybe all the grid folks are going to be saying, we really need both. We can't reduce hydro peaking because we need hydro peaking and we need battery storage. I'm wondering if that's what the message is that they're getting. And yeah, I'm wondering how they're going to put that together. And especially since so much battery storage does come from really environmentally damaging processes elsewhere. And then here in New England, for example, our alternative source of hydropower is Canadian hydropower, which is giant hydropower being built in pristine rivers and Indigenous peoples' territory. Like, I'm just wondering what's going to be, how are we going to balance this out to really achieve these grid changes we want while really protecting ecosystems as well?
Great question. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can take a contrarian view. The big pump storage project in this state in California was the Helms project, or is the Helms project. And it's a PG&E facility, and it was touted to be the way to take baseload power from the PG&E's Rancho Seco nuclear power plant, and take it at night when that plant, which is not a peaker, not a load follower, to essentially be an ancillary part of the big nuclear power plant there on the coast. Whether you consider that to be an environmental advantage or not, I'm not so sure. But that was PG&E's story back in the 70s, I guess.
All right, well, maybe we can come back to this, but in the meantime, while people are thinking on that one, William.
Yeah, two questions. One is just kind of sort of raw physics. My understanding with Northfield Mountain is that I think if it takes 100 or 1.33 gigawatts to pump all that water up, it takes more energy to pump the water than to generate. So I think it's about a third more. And my question on the chemical battery side, is it a similar ratio, more or less? I'm not sure how different or what the delta is like on the chemical battery side.
There are always efficiency losses, and I invite any national lab folks who are more intelligent on this topic than I am to jump in and correct me. But there are efficiency losses. You might put 100 electrons into a battery and get 85 out. I think that is roughly the efficiency loss with lithium ion technology. Is about a 15% loss. So there always is some. Now that's improving, and that's better than pump storage.
Well, yeah, it just, from pure efficiency, it seems like if it can work for pump storage and those efficiency losses, it seems like it would be economically feasible on a chemical battery side. Andrew, I liked you thinking about policy. I'm sure you've also thought of this as well, but it seems like putting your incentives hat on. I mean, it's all going to go to the bottom line and how long it takes for that return on investment. When I think about the various agencies and resources that consult on a FERC relicensing, archaeological, water quality, fish, recreation, it's not clear to me that any of those interests can, well, maybe, I don't know. I think some more thought would be needed, but you can at least make some arguments for the environmental benefits. But it seems like the two drivers are the license holder / company. It's either they're going to come to the conclusion that it's in their interest or not. And then as far as FERC issuing the license, from a policy standpoint, I'm just not clear how FERC could say thou shalt install a battery.
Correct. I'm not either. And right, the relevant agencies, that's not their job to say this is your technical solution to make mitigation. So you're right. I haven't been able to figure out what there is there with the good work the resource agencies do.
All we have is the Federal Power Act, and I don't know if Congress is going to take up some amendment to that act and somehow require or force a battery analysis or anything along those lines.
This is Spreck Rosecrans out here in California, and I just think with all this renewable power, we really need advanced battery technology to solve these problems. But I'll also note that in the early 90s, there was a big study in Glen Canyon Dam, just above the Grand Canyon, where there were big impacts in the Grand Canyon from peaking power at Glen Canyon. And one of the ways in which we help to minimize those effects was to show that a base load, a more base load running of the Glen Canyon Dam had less impacts from the fossil fuel that would be burned at other times, essentially would displace coal in favor of natural gas at the time. And I don't know whether that argument can be applied elsewhere, but it may still be useful.
Spreck, there's a case study in the PNNL paper specifically about Glen Canyon Dam that I would recommend you look at. I don't remember all the specifics of it. I'm not as familiar with that facility, but I know that they highlighted that project in some ways that pairing storage could benefit it.
Jack, I wanted to ask you to speak a bit more about the study request and what you found successful, what you would maybe do differently next time. Any tips you can share for others who are interested in doing their own?
Yeah, I'm happy to share all the documents. Of course, it's all public in the docket, and we can compile these and get them to Colleen to make available to anybody that wants to look at them. It was the only study request I've ever put in. I feel like I got lucky, to be honest, but it was probably just timing and the stars aligning and the technology and the national labs work. As for things I would have done differently, I did phrase it in terms of battery storage specifically. And I wish that I had left it broader to other forms of energy storage to give the utility, to give the licensee more leeway to explore other opportunities. Of course, they were only interested in doing what FERC asked them to do and no more. And had we let them potentially think about other forms of energy storage, they have some compressed air storage on their grid already, there may have been other opportunities. So I would just advise folks to keep it as broad as possible.
Yeah, here. I would say the same thing for some of the conversations we've been having.
So Andy, getting back to the policy question, there's a comment from David here in the chat. The state resource agency could make it a condition of 401 to mitigate environmental impact. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And I should give a big shout out to David because he was working on this relicensing and many others for many years. So he knows his way around a 401, right, David? I think it's possible. It depends on the state. Again, it's, requiring a specific technical solution. And I could imagine states would be pretty wary about imposing that. The resource agencies will design fishways and, get in the technical level there. So might be possible. So, there's always Vermont, brave little state going forward with this.
Excellent. Teresa?
I'm just thinking of some projects that I'm already in, that we've some of them were right in the middle of the study proposals. Some of them were well past, but haven't gotten to the final license issuance. Any suggestions for readdressing this, trying to reintroduce this, or not reintroduce, but introduce this concept into any of those processes where we're after the study request, but before the issuance of a final license, if there's any recourse to, or any ideas?
Always ask. I mean, we've taken a couple of long shot swings after those study periods have closed. We're in an integrated licensing process. You can keep trying, but it's a tough. So we ended up just hiring a consultant, getting a report and pushing it across the table, trying to figure out if we can exercise any influence there. So I'm afraid I don't have a good answer, but you may have a savvy lawyer that can figure out how to get inside the FERC process, depending on where you're at.
We're also going
soft power. Sorry, Jack.
Also going through an ILP procedure with the Harris relicensing. We put in our study request after the first phase of the first draft round of studies. So not at the very beginning period. So it was a long shot for sure. And I would recommend, Teresa, depending on your relationship with some of the licensee, if they are behind it or can see some of the benefits, even later in the process, you might have more luck getting a study performed if the licensee suddenly sees this, if it's partially their idea. Because we are seeing license amendments being filed to add storage by licensees, and those seem to be received well.
And that is it's a question for us, as I noted, Teresa. We've got amended final license applications that have been filed. There's not a ready for environmental analysis determination. There's settlement, and then this battery storage solar project, lands in the middle. It's like, well, what? You know, so that's a strategy to be able to require that that project actually include that. Will that work? I don't know. But.
All right, and Vishwas, you want to jump in?
Hi. It's just great conversation. I'm enjoying listening into this a whole bunch. And Jack has pointed out a bunch of work that we've done here at PNNL that talks to a lot of these points. So I would highly recommend everybody who's interested in reading those. But just to keep the conversation going a little bit, I remember somebody asked that how much do we really need hydro going into a renewable, sort of highly renewable future, and so just to speak on that, like we have been studying a little bit about as more utilities are joining the energy imbalance market, that their peaking operations and their reliance on the overall ramping requirements that EIMs have over a utility is increasing, and their reliance on hydro to provide for this ramping is also increasing, right? So so a lot of the utilities have now sort of started being interested in how, you know, peaking operations are impacting their assets as well, right? So there's a lot of asset management wear and tear aspects to this, and then and how battery storage can help mitigate some of this wear and tear by streamlining the operations, which sort of like, you know, directly points to better environmental outcomes as well, because as you try and make sure that your assets are not like, you know, changing directions more often, meaning reduced sort of ramping in either direction or reduced sort of peaking operations, that essentially is you know, getting more towards run of the river kind of operations, which is more sort of environment friendly. Just from the face of it. Of course, we need to do more sort of analysis to really figure out how much it would be impactful. But so there is a lot of interest going on in that direction, and we are trying to evaluate some of these things as well. And then the other point I wanted to talk about was also being able to co-locate or locate storage sort of more opportunistically. There are a couple of points to think about there. It would be that it's definitely, there are a lot of advantages in not co-locating the battery systems. The big one being, you know, resilience perspectives, right? I mean, if you say you are in a wildfire prone area, then you can use that battery storage for a microgrid operations. So a lot of sort of resilience side, grid resilience side applications there too. But one limiting factor in not co-locating would also be the transmission capacity that sort of severely limits the storage that you can then pair with your hydro operations, right? So just co-locating it with the hydro power plant also has advantages of, you know, you can have a larger battery sizing, which would have a larger impact on whatever is the outcome that you are then trying to go for, better asset management or better environmental outcomes. But yeah, just some of those thoughts there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really great to have the national labs dropping inside this, and you're doing great work. So.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone. Oh, Jack, go ahead.
Colleen, I just, something occurred to me to answer Teresa's question from earlier about how to potentially get this study during an ongoing relicensing that's past sort of the initial study phase. You know, at Harris, we have a pretty classic reservoir lake contingent of stakeholders and downstream contingents of lake holders, all of whom have competing interests. And by being able to smooth out releases and smooth out lake level fluctuations, that's something that appeals to recreationists and people who live on the reservoir and people who live downstream from the reservoir and suffer flooding pretty frequently. It's not necessarily, I mean, it also provides an environmental benefit, but it also, if you can get other stakeholder groups besides the environmental NGOs participating in your relicensing on board with, they may not care about the technology or the environmental benefits, but hey, if the lake level fluctuations are going to decrease by a sizable percentage, or we're not going to get blasted as hard downstream, you know, build friends that way if you can.
That's a great point, Jack. All right, any final questions? Oops. Tom, did you raise your hand? Oh. All right, well, in that case, oh, there is one question in the chat here from Eve. Vishwas, just to clarify a couple things you said, by the increase in energy imbalance markets, is this about non-ISO regions? For those in ISO regions, an energy imbalance market is basically a real-time market, yes?
I am by no means a market expert at all, but I believe that is not the case. Like non-ISO or ISO regions have nothing to do with how EIMs are set up. It's just that EIMs are more sort of granular on a time step, and so the market bids get cleared every 5 minutes, as opposed to the more traditional sort of 15-minute time step. Or actually, it's going even lower than 5 minutes, I believe. And that is that need has primarily driven out of more renewable penetration actually as well, because of the fluctuations on the solar and wind side are just tremendous, right? So at a very granular time scale too. So, but I don't claim to be a market expert at all. So I might be wrong on that. I would have to get back to you on that if yes, that is like for ISO regions that it is the real-time market, but yeah.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much to everyone who's participated in this discussion and joined to listen to the discussion. There's been a lot of interest in this topic, which I think is great because it's a big and emerging issue. So thank you so much to Jack and Andy. We really, really appreciate it. And like I said at the beginning, the recording of this brown bag will go out to all of you in an email in the coming days. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Colleen, and thanks to the Hydro Reform Coalition. It's a great resource. So thanks everybody for coming out.